There it is. All right. Welcome back, everybody. It is Wednesday, which is my Friday, which is, according to Disney Plus, Wednesday's the new Friday. In case you missed it, check out Loki. He did that. Anyway, you guys all know that I'm a big Marvel nerd. Y'all all know that. You all know that. Yeah, something like that. Anyway, we're going to have a good time today talking about intersection between autism and relationships. This will be fun, educational. Here we go.
Practicing Polyamory, real-life perspectives from the imperfect people of polyamory. The mission of the Practicing Polyamory podcast is to provide a platform for all of the real-life, flawed humans that practice polyamory so that we might all learn from one another and grow as a community. Enjoy the show.
All right. Welcome, everybody. Before we jump in and chat with today's awesome guest, I really quickly want to remind everybody to please follow the show, especially on Facebook and Instagram, where I'm most active, but you can find us anywhere on all social media platforms at Practicing Poly. By the way, I just discovered TikTok today and made my first one, so check me out there as well. I'll be trying to post more all over the place. Anyway, the more followers I get, we can show up higher on those search results. Super easy, free way to support the show. Another free way, the best free way to support the show is to subscribe and leave a review on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever it is that you download the podcast. Excuse me. My goal is to get to 40,000 subscribers, and with your help, I know I can get there. So please, if you find value in what we're doing here, share it with your polycule, your poly friends, your chosen family, and everywhere you can on the interwebs. Lastly, and as always, I want to remind you, if you are listening to this show, you're a welcome guest. Be on the show. If you are actively polyamorous, polyam curious, or a professional serving the polyamorous community, I want to hear your story. If you are disabled, BIPOC, pan, bi, demi, gay, straight, sex worker, kinkster, queer, lesbian, trans, NB, arrow, ace, whatever it is, we want to hear your story. The more stories we hear, the more the world learns about us, the more representation we have, the better we can serve our community. So go to practicingpolyamory.com and sign up today. All right, everybody, that's my spiel. The best part of the show. Here we go. Let's introduce today's guest. Our guest today is a therapist who works primarily with issues relating to sexual and relationship health, including kink exploration, I'll get it right, polyamory and non-monogamy, intimacy, and attachment. Over the years in her practice, she's often found that polyamory has a tendency to open a Pandora's box of childhood trauma, especially when first opening up, and people are often surprised to learn about their lingering attachment wounds as they navigate this new way of relating. Now, while our guest can always help the general population with their relationships, she specializes in working with those who are neuro-diverse and their loved ones, primarily Autism Spectrum Disorder. She's passionate about helping those at the intersection between ASD and sex and relationships, and she hosts a bi-weekly therapy group for adults with autism where they can share resources, build skills, and have an opportunity for socialization with others like them. There's so much to learn from today's awesome guest. I cannot wait to dive in. Joining us today out of Bellingham, Washington, welcome to the show, B. Lourenco.
That's an intro. Nice.
We do like to have fun here on the Practicing Polyamory podcast. B, thank you so much for hanging out with me. Thank you so much for spending some time with me. I'm really excited to have you here today.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Very cool. It's a pleasure. So tell me, first of all, a little bit about yourself. You specialize in adults with autism and finding them in that intersection where they're struggling with relationships. Just kind of tell me a little bit of, like, just the broad overview of what that looks like. I know that's a very vague question, but there's giving you a lot of room there.
All day talking about this. So what I've done is really combined the two areas of passion for myself. I have been working with the autistic community for years. I am self-diagnosed autistic. My child is autistic. And it was pretty natural to bring that expertise into the work that I was doing with folks around sex and relationships and things like that. and finding that there's a huge deficit in our communities in helping folks who are kind of atypical in any way, accessing alternative lifestyles and relationships and information for how to make those things work for them. So it's been really fun to help folks kind of explore these unique identities that that can be marginalizing until you kind of find your people. And so I try to help them find their people.
Yeah, it definitely can be marginalizing. I think I was having a conversation with somebody not too long ago about this. And I mentioned, you know, it is a spectrum, right? So it's a wide range. And you mentioned that you are self-diagnosed. So what does that look like? I mean, if I'm going to be wondering whether or not I'm on the spectrum, neurodiverse, what are things that I'm looking for?
So a quick, mini history here.
Sure.
Most of the things that folks can be diagnosed with in terms of mental health and even physical health have been researched on really minimal population groups. A lot of them, especially mental health, were researched on white males. So we have a really good sense of what autism looks like in white males, what we call sort of a typical presentation. But what we're learning is that the presentation for femmes or AFAB people, BIPOC folks, people who maybe experienced childhood trauma, things like that, that their presentations look different. And what happens is these folks end up going through most of their childhood into adulthood without knowing that the thing that's going on for them is a neurological difference. So they often struggle with a lot of anxiety, depression, things like that, not knowing that kind of the things that are going on for them might be related to having a neurological difference. So that's kind of the first piece of that. The second piece, what are we looking for? This other presentation, if you will, is what we call the masking presentation. Sometimes you'll hear it referred to as the femme presentation, meaning that for whatever reason, if you're born assigned female at birth, if you're from another marginalized population, like BIPOC or something like that, that because of the systems that you live in, you have to learn how to function in them differently. So you may mask your traits that are related to autism, and that masking actually leads to further distress. So what things do we notice? Well, we notice folks who are really literal. We notice folks who have a really strong sense of right and wrong and will often lean into doing what is right, even if it doesn't serve them. Folks with sensory differences, and this is a big one that comes up in sex and relationships, right, is kind of perceiving the world in a different way with your sensory systems. Things like being oversensitive to sound or undersensitive to touch, things like that can really impact relating to other people. Social differences are a big one too. In the autism world, we're kind of trying to shift away from it being really deficit based and move toward difference based. So folks who are autistic just communicate a little bit differently. We're more direct and to the point. Social niceties don't make a whole lot of sense and seem to kind of get in the way of clear communication. And how this shows up in relationships, of course, is that if you're with a neurotypical person and you are a neurodivergent person, your communication systems are going to be a little bit different. And so that's where I come in a lot with helping folks kind of learn how to better communicate with either their neurodivergent partner or their neurotypical partner, kind of depending on which operating system they are born with.
So you're helping people to establish, I guess, like the rules of communication, kind of creating that bridge so that they can understand that. One of the interesting things that you said was that we're trying to move away from seeing autism, ASD as a deficiency. And I missed the other term that you used there. We're trying to see it as something else.
As
What was
a difference, a neurological
The
difference.
difference.
There's actually a desire to shift to autism spectrum condition rather than autism spectrum disorder, with the understanding that the easiest way I can explain this, we live in an Apple world. If you imagine that everything in the world is sort of designed for Apple systems, autistic people are like being androids in an Apple world. So you can do a lot of the same things with an Android that you can do with an Apple. In fact, Androids are better at certain things than Apple phones are.
For sure.
But if you live in a world that's designed for Apple, it's going to seem like you have a deficit if you're an Android. But if you get around a bunch of other Androids, there's no deficit. There's no issue because the communication is the same. Folks who are autistic actually get each other really well. The running joke in the autism world is that it's only a disability when we're with neurotypicals. If you go to Comic-Con, neurotypicals are the ones with the disability because the autistic folks are going to be just fine. Because, you know, Comic-Con and nerd culture is pretty infiltrated by autistic folks. So the idea that it's a disability is kind of something that we're shifting away from and seeing it more as just a neurotype that is different but has its own strengths and difficulties.
That is definitely an interesting point. And I love your analogy. It's you're only there's only a difference if you are not an Apple person. And don't tell my partner that because she's totally an Android person. We have this conversation all the time. But
I love you.
Hold up. Wait a minute.
Yeah, my brother playing producer back there, he converted. But yeah, it's so okay. So that's where we are in society at large. When you're talking about the intersection between neurodivergency and sex and relationships, that's, as you said, that's one of the things that you work with your clients on, is kind of bridging that gap and helping them to create some communication rules, I guess. That's what I'm going to use. You might label it differently. Are there some like standard procedures, like standard operating procedures that you kind of use across the board, or what are some of the basic steps that a couple or throuple or, you know, foursome, moresome, all of these people can take to create that bridge so they can communicate better?
Yeah. So one piece here that's really important is recognizing that while being autistic doesn't always equate to a disability, that it is a minority. And so if you're in relationship with someone who's neurodivergent, the neurotypical person has privilege because, again, they're the Apple existing in the Apple world. So they're going to have some privilege that the neuroatypical or neurodivergent person does not. And that's important to note, because when we're talking about building the bridge, we need to make sure that we're not putting the onus of the building on the person who's autistic or on the person who's the minority, right? Kind of thinking about other ways that partners can have privilege in relationships. It's really important to make sure that we're acknowledging neurotypical privilege when we're in relationships with mixed neurotypes. So that's point one. And what that looks like, kind of segueing off of that, is a ton of psychoeducation. It's teaching neurotypical folks what autistic communication is like and how to better communicate with the autistic person, really clear communication, right? We're not talking in veiled, passive, oh, you know what I mean? Like, no, we need to be really clear. We need to specifically say what we mean. So that's really the key piece, right? Is super clear communication that's not veiled in social niceties and, ooh, let's make sure we don't upset feelings and things like that. Like, it's direct, it's straightforward. Give us the information. And then I think for the neurotypical person, really learning how to accept communication from an autistic person without kind of getting their feelings hurt, right? Because autistic folks tend to be pretty clear, direct, maybe even a little bit blunt. It can land on neurotypical folks in ways that maybe feel abrasive or disconcerting because we aren't socialized to communicate that way. This really allows for some of that to fall away and for the words that are spoken to be the things that we're communicating about, and not the what did you mean and how did the tone and things like that. We're really getting into the nitty-gritty of specifics in relationships that include a neurodivergent person. Does that make sense?
It definitely does. As you're explaining this, the part that's sticking out to me is the giving clear and direct instructions, and just the directness in general,
Yeah.
and the need for like absolute clarity. There is a child in our family. I want to say he's like 7 or 8 years old, something like that. And his mom, has to, same thing, like give very, very clear instructions on how to clean his room. If you tell the kid to go clean the room, he'll go over there and maybe, pick up the things off the floor and moves, but unless she's specific with what she wants each thing to do, to be done, it's not all going to get done. So is that kind of the same thing? Does that trend follow into adulthood? Does a neurotypical person have to tell their neurodivergent partner step by step how to clean the kitchen, if they're living together, for example?
So yes and no. We don't want to like infantilize the neurodivergent person and assume that, they don't know what cleaning the kitchen means. However, if my definition of cleaning the kitchen means that there are no dishes left in the sink, and your definition means that you've wiped the counters and swept the floors and emptied the dishwasher, but you left a couple things soaking in the kitchen, we might have an issue there, right? So the person saying, hey, I need you to clean the kitchen, including leaving things in the sink and making sure that we don't, leave stuff overnight because that matters to me, right? So it doesn't mean necessarily walking through everything step by step, but it does mean including specifics if those specifics are things that matter to you. In the realm of poly, that might look like, maybe somebody says, I don't want you to have sex on the first date. Well, if we haven't been more clear about that, the person who's neurodivergent might take that to mean anytime after the first date is fine. And the person who said it might have a lot more that means in terms of don't have sex on the first date. Maybe that means you can do a couple of things on the second date, but you're not comfortable with sex until there's been some kind of, fluid conversation or something like that. Right. So it's things like that, just having like those more specific, or being okay with really specific answers. If I say, hey, I don't want you to have sex on the first date, and the response is, okay, well, how about the second date? That's not meant to be pokey. That's meant to be clarifying.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it.
It gets confusing.
It can. And I mean, those types of conversations that you're talking about, it sounds like just kind of standard across the board, conversations that we typically have around sex and around, household chores. So I don't know, maybe I'm not providing good enough examples, but I'm like trying to see where we might have to get more specific. I know that I know that a neurodivergent person is going to be different. They're going to have, require more clarity. I'm just trying to think of like a clearer example, but if you can come up with something,
Yeah. So one thing that I do experience quite a bit when I'm working with mixed neurotype couples is that so in a neurotypical couple, say they're both neurotypical, what happens sometimes is you can talk about something once and feel like you both have landed on a solution, and then you don't really need to talk about that thing again. However, with neurodivergent folks, because of the need for specificity, you will find that you might have the same conversation over and over. That you might,
Got it.
the person will be like, okay, no sex on the first date, but what about a second date? We've had, and they're getting into the specifics. And it's like what I often hear is the neurotypical partner being like, I thought we talked about this already. And the neurodivergent partner being like, well, no, because we didn't talk about this specific thing that I'm asking about right now. Right. And
Got
so
it.
it can get a little bit uncomfortable in, one term that I hear a lot from neurotypical folks with regard to how autistic folks need to communicate, especially around triggering things like open relationships, is it feels like we're beating a dead horse. No, we're getting clarity because as a autistic person, we go through the world getting little blips of information and the assumption that we're able to fill in the gaps and that we're going to get it right. And a lot of discomfort associated with people being upset when we didn't get it right, when we didn't read the mind or do the social nicety just right. So when you're in a partnership with someone like that, that's part of that privilege in being aware that out in the world, there's a lot of not clear communication coming our way for our neurotype. So in relationship, you can really offer that by allowing your neurotypical partner to bring things up multiple times and not being like, oh, this again, I thought we landed somewhere.
Got it.
Is that a helpful example?
That absolutely does. That absolutely does. And that gets me to thinking about relationship styles, right? Especially in, obviously our polyamorous, we've got, kitchen table poly, and then we've got parallel, right? So if I'm dating a neurodivergent person that needs this type of communication, and I've been with that person long enough that I can communicate with them very well, and I've given them very specific instructions. Now next thing you know, we start dating somebody new, or they start dating somebody new, and my question that I want to get to is, how do you see that those mixed how did you call it? Mixed neurotype? Mixed neurotypes. Mixed neurotypes. What tends to work best from what you've seen? A kitchen table approach or a parallel approach where we just don't introduce the other partner?
Yeah, that's a good question. And much like neurotypical folks, autistic folks are varied in their answers for this. One thing about, for example, the kitchen table dynamic that can be lovely for neurodivergent folks is the ability to check with others about communication, to follow up. Hey, so I had this conversation with partner A, and these are the things that were said, but I had some confusion about that. Partner C, what do you think? Am I missing something here? That I think that those types of scenarios can actually be really helpful for some autistic folks. However, sometimes having sort of the cleanness of separate can also be really lovely, because maybe the rules of one type of relationship are a little bit different than the rules of another type of relationship. And it's easier to keep those things separated than having everybody all together and needing to kind of, to borrow a term from Black culture, to have to code switch, if you will, as an autistic person. That sometimes that clean separation, they know, like, this is how I show up in this relationship, this is how I show up here, and we don't commingle because it's
Mhm.
harder for me to navigate multiple people at once. So I haven't
Got it.
seen one model or the other that necessarily works better for neurodivergent folks. Although I will say that one thing that I have kind of butt up against a lot with neurodivergent couples that are mixed neurotype couples is this don't ask, don't tell component.
Ah.
That I think there is maybe a desire from the neurotypical side to have a more don't ask, don't tell because of the autistic person's need for information and clear information. That they're like, if we just do a don't ask, don't tell, then we can just keep everything separate and everybody will be fine. It'll be great. Which I'm sure you've had conversations with other folks about don't ask, don't tell, and how poorly it seems to work in practice most of the time.
Pretty much, yeah. It's not necessarily a style that we typically recommend.
Right,
But,
and I don't either.
yeah.
But I do see it often where there's a push kind of for that that style, and my assumption, my story about that is that it has to do with the clarifying questions that you might get from an autistic person that maybe they don't want to have to deal with.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, if I was dating somebody and then, just getting question after question after question, I feel like I'm getting interrogated. It might be easier to just say, you know what, let's just not talk about it at all, and that'll solve the problem. But it doesn't.
Yeah.
It doesn't.
It doesn't.
So what advice would you give, in that situation where somebody is kind of leaning towards that, don't ask, don't tell? We're sitting here talking about that. Neither one of us really recommends it. So do you tell people, hey, I really don't recommend that. I think this is what you should do?
Well, it gets a little bit dicey as a therapist to give recommendations, if you will, right? We often try to guide or give information and let clients make their own decisions. But I do have I give an analogy for this. Most of my work actually is in analogy, sort of like the iPhone Android situation. I talk about so I say, imagine that your partner is building a sculpture. And when they come home from working on the sculpture, they tell you a little bit about what's going on with it. And depending on the information that they give you about what's going on with this sculpture, you're going to picture it in your head. So if I say to you, yeah, I found a great piece of marble today, you're going to picture marble as part of the thing that I'm working on. Now, if I'm operating under don't ask, don't tell, I'm just going to say I'm making a sculpture. And you don't know how tall it is, you don't know how big it is, you don't know what it's made from, you know nothing about it. But if I'm giving you information, telling you about the things that I found, I got it over 15 feet tall today, things like that, when the time comes for me to potentially show you the sculpture, you're not going to be shocked because it's way bigger than you thought that it was. Or it's made from material that you weren't planning for it to be made from. With don't ask, don't tell, it's essentially like I'm building a sculpture and you don't know what that means. It could be this big, it could be 50 feet tall. But if I'm telling you things about it, then it may not be exact, right? Because what we picture in our head is hardly ever exactly like what's taking place in reality. But we're not going to be shocked. We're not going to feel a ton of surprise when we do eventually see the sculpture or find out about the sculpture in real time, because we have an idea, a closer approximation of reality.
Right.
So
we know if it's this big or that big.
Exactly. So that's typically what I tell folks is like, this is the don't ask, don't tell model. And the difficulties associated with that is shock and surprise and betrayal sometimes. And the do tell model allows for less likelihood of that to take place.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, if we're in a don't ask, don't tell, you're never going to know how much my feelings are changing or evolving or developing or whatever for this other person, that whole entire time. And that's the 50-foot statue that all of a sudden shows up at your front door, and you're like, where the heck did this thing come from? So,
and the partner is like, but I told you I was building.
Fine by me.
Yes, exactly.
I'm sorry. And you were saying the partner is like, how?
The partner is like, but I told you I was building a statue. Why are you mad? Like, I've been honest with you. It's not like I built a statue in secret. I didn't hide the statue from you. And the other person is like, but, because it feels like a surprise. It's not what they were expecting.
You didn't.
I don't think it means what you think it means.
You didn't tell me it was 50 feet tall. Yeah, I hear you.
Exactly.
Well, B, this has been super educational. I feel like I am a little bit more prepared if I ever get into a relationship with someone who is neurodivergent. I wanted to ask you, is there anything that I missed? Is there anything that you wish that I had asked, or just maybe some final thoughts that you might want to leave on the subject for the audience?
Yeah, one thing that I do want to say, we kind of focused on the communication piece and how that can be a little bit challenging when you're in relationship with a neurodiverse person. But autistic people are really great to be in relationships with. We're really detail oriented, and we see things that other people don't see. So if you're like out shopping and you go, oh, that thing's really cool, autistic people are going to buy it for you for your next birthday present. Like we're the ones that notice the little things and the little nuances. And that's actually really lovely to be in relationship with, and is sort of the flip side of needing more communication, is that you also get this really rich, truthful, authentic relationship with folks who, quite frankly, aren't very good at lying and being anything other than who they really are. So that's the sort of the plus side. You might have to do a little more hard communication, but the payoffs are really lovely as well.
Nice. I love that. That's fantastic. Yeah. All right, B, the last thing I want to ask you is, if somebody wants to work with you, if somebody wants to get in touch with you, join therapy groups with you, whatever it is, how can people get in touch with you?
They should go to my website. It's got my email and phone number information. Reach out. I would say, honestly, email is probably the quickest and fastest way. We are still in pandemic times. There's a lot of mental health need in the world. So I am a bit full, but I'm happy to offer what I can, put folks on wait lists, things like that. Maybe get referrals to other sources. So yeah, checking my website is a great place to start.
Perfect. And what's that website for our listening audience?
It's blourencotherapy.com.
Perfect. All right, B, again, today has been so much fun. I definitely feel like I've learned a lot. Hopefully our audience did as well. Thank you so much for your time and for hanging out with me today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
And thank you, as always, to our live audience as well. As a reminder, when you're live, you get no commercial interruptions, but the same cannot be said for those podcast downloads. So if you want to avoid the commercial interruptions, be sure to catch us live right here, Monday through Wednesday, 2:30 Pacific time, or sign up for Patreon, where you get access to our commercial-free RSS feed and support the show. That's patreon.com/practicingpoly. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube and wherever it is that you download your podcast if you haven't already. And please leave us a review. We'll really appreciate it. Thank you all. And thank you again, B, for producer back there at Business Bros Pod, and everybody else.
Have a nice day.
Thank you for tuning in to the Practicing Polyamory podcast. Would you or someone in your polycule like to be a guest? Sign up at practicingpolyamory.com and join the conversation. Please support us by subscribing, liking, and following us on social media at Practicing Polya by clicking any of the affiliate links on our website, or by subscribing at patreon.com/practicingpolya.